brisket, one of the all-time greats for gatherings, parties, celebrations, for whatever. There's very few things that are better than a brisket, and it really is not that difficult to prepare. A lot of people have never done it before, and once they try it, they're like, hey, I could do this again. So today we're gonna be talking about some tips. I'm gonna show you how I would prepare brisket. I've actually got two. I'm gonna be getting ready for a big party, and thought, well, let's make a video of this, so hopefully you enjoy today. As we roll into today's video, you gotta pick up a brisket, and it's one of those pieces of meat that actually is fairly inexpensive per pound. I bought this today. It's 2022, spring of 2022, and this thing cost me it's $3.99 a pound. Picked it up at Costco, and this is prime. There's also the Wagyu. You can get lesser cuts of meat, but I would say with the brisket, definitely go for that prime if you can. It'll still be good with some of the lower cuts, and the Wagyu is even better, but prime is amazing, and every time I've done it, no regrets at all. But you do have to buy a pretty big slab of meat, so it's not super cheap as far as the quantity. You have to get a good quantity to really make this work right. So there are some smaller ways you can buy it, but I would go get a good piece of prime and pay the bucks. You can put some in the freezer, put in the fridge for lunches for several days, or just have a whole bunch of people over and watch them gobble it up. So the brisket comes in, this is actually kind of part of the belly, the front side of the cow, so it's actually a fairly tough piece of meat. If you were to try to cook this like a steak, something like that, you would not like it. It would be tough and hard. So ultimately what you're doing is you're doing an extremely slow cook. You'll typically cook this, and you can go from 180, 200 degrees up to 250, 275, kind of depending. There's some different strategies we'll talk about. But you're cooking this at a low temperature for a long period of time. And unlike steaks and hamburgers where you're cooking it, medium or medium rare, and getting up to 160 or some other temperature around there, these things you're going to go and you're going to cook for hours and hours. In fact, 8, 12, even up to 16 hours you'll cook this thing, and it will slowly rise temperature-wise. Many hours later, after whether you smoke it or whatever else, it's going to kind of hit this 160-ish, 165, and it's just going to stop. You're going to be like, wow, it's been that temperature for hours. It's called the stall, and then it's going to, after a while, after a long time of having the stall, it's going to start peaking up, and you're going to pull this thing off the grill, or you're going to finish it off at about 202, 203 degrees, and let it sit for several hours wrapped up before you even serve it. So it's a slow process, but it's not difficult. So let me walk you through what I'm going to do. I'm going to kind of bring the camera in, let you kind of see what I do as I go through this. There's some trimming and getting it ready, getting it seasoned, and then we'll get it on the smoker, and I'm going to show you how I do that. Again, you can cook this inside the house, whether it's in the oven, just slow, low temperatures. That's the key. But I'll show you today the strategy of cooking this thing on the smoker for a while, getting a lot of flavor in it, and then eventually wrapping it up and finishing this off inside on the oven. So let's zoom in and cut this thing open. All right, so this is a 16.9 pound prime brisket, and it's sold as a whole. You can buy some briskets that are cut where you'll get the tip or the flat, and I'll explain that in a little bit, but most of the time the briskets are sold as a whole. So let me finish cutting this thing open and put it on the cutting board. There's typically some juices inside that, just to avoid messes, you have to try to keep that out of the way. What you got here is, this is the flat right here, and this is typically mostly cut away as far as the fat. We're going to do some trimming in a little bit, and then you got, let me flip this thing over. Okay, so flat is down here, and it goes up to what's called the tip. And the grains actually grow, well, the grains actually go two different directions here. So when you actually cut this, you're going to be cutting it one direction for a bit, and then when you get to the tip, you're going to cut it a different direction to be able to make this thing well. So ultimately, this is going to be two parts, and there's a giant fat ring that goes down and kind of separates these. This muscle here, we're going to go ahead and trim up some of the fat, get some of the big pieces that would not render, and slow cook off. Get this thing ready to go, and then this will cook as one piece, but you're going to end up with the tip, which has a lot more fat in there that is super juicy. It's amazing. It's actually the best part for tasting. Some people who aren't as much into fat, they definitely go more towards the flats. It's not that it's dry, but it's different flavor than this, and the texture. So you kind of can hit different worlds, different flavors that people like, different textures, that sort of thing. So you're going to see here, there's a lot of fat that will come. It's already been trimmed, but as far as there's some extra trimming you need to do to get this thing ready. And this is just it's a hard, giant chunk that we're going to cut this off, set this aside. Trim off a lot of this. You still want to leave about 1/4 inch of fat along here, and that will slow cook in there and just be amazing at the end. But you don't want anything more than the kind of that 1/8 to 1/4 inch. And even if you got these little bald spots from as you cut it, I'll probably have a couple more in a bit. That's okay, but in general, you'll leave a layer of fat here, trim up some sides here, and then the bottom. So let me take you through how I do that. Let me turn this. I start cutting some of the large pieces of fat off here. Okay, so I'm going to continue to trim this. And as I'm going through, I'm watching if I start to see some meat, kind of back it off a bit. One thing I want to show you is we have our flat that goes through here, and then there is a really thick layer of fat that comes through here, and these two join together with what's the tip, and this is that really flavorful, kind of fatty, juicy part down here. So a lot of people will leave this, they'll just kind of shave this a little bit and I have it kind of indented almost. I like to do that, just a little bit less fat on there, and it really gets the fat in here cooked. And then there's at times where I'll go and I'll actually go through and slice this off, so I've got the flat separated from the tip and cook them separately. It allows for more crust, which is kind of that outside surface. And then if one part cooks faster than the other, I can take that off and not have a piece dry out. But in general, cooking it like this is great. That fat inside of there will flavor both these parts and be good to go. So this one is decent. There's a little bit of fat left on here, and that's fine. That'll cook on there and be wonderful. You'll see what that looks like. But I want to make sure as much smoke as possible can penetrate into the meat. So that's why I want to go and expose a lot of this here. This thing is trimmed good enough. Generally, with a good piece of meat like this, you can just do coarse salt and pepper and just give this thing a good covering, and that'll be amazing. The brisket, the smoke flavor, especially if you're smoking it, salt, pepper is just sufficient. My other go-to, and there's a bazillion things you can get out there, but I also just, you know, I've got the Montreal steak seasoning. I like to put this on there. It's mostly salt. It's got the pepper and a couple other things in there. Does a great job. So I'll go pretty generously on this thing. All the sides, kind of massage it in, and then while this is sitting, I'll go set up my smoker and get that thing ready to go. But the seasoning, the salt, the pepper, all of that, and the smoke really permeates. You'll see a layer by the time we cut this. There'll be a layer of flavor and crust and smoke goodness that's just amazing. So nothing magical again about this. Just take the seasoning and you go pretty generous. Massage it in. Flip her over. And now a lot of the stuff here may fall off later on, like might come out when the fat's cut off, but some of those flavors and the juices still permeate it. And again, I want to make sure I get all my little parts of the tip here covered. My dog's over on the side like, I smell beef. I want it so bad. Try not to beg. But I've got her full attention. So yeah, really massage that in. All right, so the brisket's inside, seasoned, ready to go. I've got my smoker out here. I've had this thing for about 10 years. There's a variety of brands you can use, but there is nothing like the smoke permeating the meat over a slow amount of time. So if you got the smoker, or if you don't got one, but you can get one, phenomenal. Now, they're still amazing in the oven. There's other ways you can cook them that they're still really good, but there is nothing like a smoked brisket. So I'm using apple pellets today. I've used pecan, those are wonderful. Mesquite. I forgot one thing. While the smoker is warming up, I wanted to talk through the kind of the process of how I'm going to do this. So for me right now, this is dinner time, and I want this thing ready for dinner tomorrow. So it really can be a 24-hour process. So what I'm going to be doing here is, as soon as this thing's warmed up, I'm going to put the brisket on here, and it's going to go ahead and smoke until bedtime. And then around bedtime, which is hopefully about 160, 165 degrees, I'm going to take this, wrap up both briskets individually, and put those things in my oven. And I'm going to let those things go at 200 degrees and let those go through the night. And in the morning time, I'll, depending on where the temperature's at, I may raise it up to 225 or just leave it there at 200. And I'm going to let that thing slow cook, and then probably by mid to late morning, this thing will hit 201, 202 degrees. Definitely by 203, I want to take this thing off and or take it out of the oven. And then at that point, I'm going to let it sit for about an hour out and kind of go down to about 175. And then while it's still wrapped up in foil. And then when that thing is kind of cooled off a bit, I'm going to go ahead and put those in coolers and let them sit through the rest of the afternoon. And it'll hold that temperature. And then around evening time, I'll come back and right before dinner, I'll pull those things out, open them up, and slice those up. They'll still be nice and hot. I'm going to watch those temperatures. You always want to make sure you keep those at a safe temperature. But if I need to, I could always warm those up back up to kind of that 160, 170 range. But those should be fine. And then have a wonderful dinner. So that's kind of the process of how I'm going to go. Right now, I've got this thing. It warmed up to, it's about 325 right now. So as it burns off that initial bit of pellets, it's going to kind of settle down to about 200, 225. And then I'll come through and put the brisket on. So let's fast forward in time. All right, so let's go ahead and take the whole briskets and put them on the smoker. Now I talked about putting both the tips at one end, but with the size of those, I cannot get this, it's going to squish too much, so I'm going to go ahead and go with this. It's full in there. I got my temperature set for 225. It's hovering about 200 degrees as far as the thermometer here, so that's what I know there. I like to keep a probe in the meat, and I've got this thing, it's a ThermoPro. It has 2 probes, and then it's a wireless connection to here that I can take this in the house and wander around and be able to get my temperature. So, and then I'll set this thing for a couple different alerts, so it keeps me up to date on how things are going in case I fall asleep later or whatever. But I've got it set for 165. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jab this into one of the fatter parts, make sure that it's not touching any metal from the lid or the grill, and have that right there in the middle of a real thick spot, probably inside the tip. Alright, so I've got the probe in the back is number 1, the probe in the front is number 2, and those are showing up at 44 degrees, so still really cool. And I'm going to let those things just sit in there, and my device here will keep me updated as I walk around the house and clean up, ready for people to come over tomorrow and enjoy some brisket. All right, 5 hours plus later, I'm ready to go to bed, so I'm gonna move these in. Thankfully, one of these is about 165, one of these is just under 160, so good enough. Lots of smoke flavor will be on those. So a couple things real quick before I show you what these look like. There's different size aluminum pans. These things are nice because of the lack of dishes later. They store them well. They work perfect for this next step of just putting them in the oven at a slow temperature, or at a low temperature for a slow amount of time. But there's different sizes, so you gotta make sure if you do the whole brisket, you pretty much always need to get the full size sheet. So you can get these different restaurant stores, order them online, get a pack of them. Super useful to have. And then there's the lids that come with it, or you can just put foil over it. So either way, these are obviously more than the foil, but they work nice and they seal it up pretty good. So let me open the lid and I'll kind of zoom in, show you what these things look like under here. It's 2 whole briskets. There's that fat that's rendering. Kind of dark tonight, but you'll be able to get the gist of what I'm doing here. Again, they're heavy, so heavy and hot. Alright, so all sealed up. Got my probe still in there. This will go in the oven at 200 degrees overnight and finish it off in the morning. Ah, the joyful sound of 202 degrees. So I've got one of them that's 201 and one of them 202. So I'm going to go ahead and pull those out of the oven and let those just sit. They're going to stay covered. Beautiful. So the resting period, which is what they're going to be doing now, so first here on the stovetop, and then later I'll put them in a cooler and let them just stay in there until about an hour before serving time. I'll watch the temperature. I want to make sure those stay at a safe temperature. However, I also don't want this thing to continue to cook, so that's why I'm going to let these sit, kind of bring the temperature down a little bit, and then in the cooler they'll stay warm throughout the daytime. Continue to let the fats and the juice kind of get back and absorb, finish off that crust. And then by the time it's dinner time, we'll unpack this and I'll show you what this thing looks like. All right, so the brisket is done. It's been resting for several hours. Had the warmer on to 170 and this thing's been sitting about 160. So let's open it up. Take a look at brisket number 1. Beautiful. Alright, oh yes, nice crust on there. The fat is really soft. Alright. Alright, look at that piece of meat. So I can see the grain here going this direction. And so I'll be cutting it mostly this way. As far as the flat, but then the tip will grows a different direction. See, remember there's that fat right there. It's just as smooth as can be. It's like almost like liquid butter. It's super tender. Whew. I'm gonna take this. I'll put the tip back in. Sit there for a little bit. All right. So this is the flat, burnt end. Let's take our first taste. Mmm. That's good. Tender and juicy.
Yes. I think we should eat before they come back.
All right, let me show you a sample from the inside here. So you got the crust. You got the crust here, and then you can see that smoke layer, that pink layer. That's the smoke that's permeated inside. Gives it a great flavor, nice and juicy. But you're gonna notice a difference here. This is the flat, so you don't see little bits of where the fat is necessarily at. You're gonna have a lot more of that on the tip, which gives it a lot of flavor, but some people, preference-wise, prefer this stuff here. All right, one of the first things I do with the tip here is I got this big fat chunk. I'm just gonna eliminate that. It's almost, you can just brush it off. And when you start getting down to the meat, that's where you leave it. All right, and you're gonna see, so the last one I was cutting like this direction, but you can see the grains are going this way, so I'm gonna rotate it. And these you're gonna be cutting into chunks. Look at that right there. There's a good, that right there, there's a good piece. All right, as I wrap things up, I'm in a little bit of a hurry. I've got two different videos I'm trying to wrap up. So the one you're watching here on the brisket, that one is, I got my first brisket cut. You saw some of the clips there. I've got another one ready to come out and get ready. So brisket's good, but at the same time, I did some ribs, some baby back ribs, and I've got a couple of the racks done here. Check out the video on the baby rack ribs and see how to make those. They're super good. I almost like those sometimes better than brisket. I go back and forth. So in conclusion, try it out. Now this is super tender. It's great. The barbecue sauce with it just makes it amazing. Great for brisket sandwiches, leftovers. So I hope you love it. If you got any thoughts, there you go. Well, leave them in the comments and have a good life.